Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thanks for being here. Please enjoy your food and beverages. Of course, the beverage bar is open for as long as this event goes on. So thank you all for being here. In the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center. How many here know who Andrew Breitbart is or have heard of Andrew Breitbart? Fantastic, yes. The Heartland Institute has been honored to name this space in here, our event space, the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center. He was a maverick, he was a rebel, he was a game changer, and he took on the establishment. He decided that the left-wing media is lying to us, and we need to get the full truth, and he had to hold them into account. And we long admired Andrew Breitbart. We've known the people that work at Breitbart.com for quite a long time, and we were very pleased to get the approval of his family and his business to name this place after him. And sometime this summer, I think, we're going to have a dedication party, a proper event to celebrate the fact that we named it the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center, and I hope to see you all there at that event as well. That'll be really something special. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. I see a lot of new faces in here, so indulge me a little bit to explain a little bit about what the Heartland Institute is all about. We're a 32-year-old think tank. Until about 8 months ago, we were headquartered in downtown Chicago, where we've been for almost our entire existence. And now we're based here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago in Arlington Heights. We came out here because, well, Chicago is Chicago, and the people in Chicago have a certain mindset. And a lot of the people that would come to our events and support the Heartland Institute as an institution live out here in the suburbs. So we decided when it was a good time to come out here and get a whole building for ourselves where the people appreciate freedom and would love to learn more about it, and that's why we are here. Our mission since our founding has been to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to social and economic problems. In short, to fight for policies that shrink the scope and the power of government, increase individual liberty, and encourage prosperity through vibrant free markets. The Heartland Institute covers key aspects of domestic policy. We don't deal with foreign policy at all, and we do that through our centers. Our Center on Budgets and Taxes, the Center for School Transformation, a center we call Consumers for Healthcare Choices, our Center for Climate and Environmental Policy, and our newest center, the Center on Constitutional Reform, and of course we also deal with issues like tobacco and vaping. We are amazingly effective in our mission. You can just Google us or ask our opponents in the arena of ideas. As they say, you're known by your enemies, or at least how angry they get. We're also one of the only free market think tanks in the country who proudly and overtly stands up for the rights of smokers, and now vapers as well. As we're going to learn tonight, there's rights that vapers have that are also under threat. We catch a lot of hell for it, but we're very proud to do it. And if you want to learn more, you can click on the tobacco link that's at the bottom, the footer of our webpage, heartland.org. That's where you'll find at first an essay called In Defense of Smokers. And then there's all sorts of other links in there to a lot of the materials we've done over the years to defend the rights of smokers. If you do like what you see tonight, whether here in person or watching online, and welcome everyone, I encourage you to look around heartland.org, check out our blog, Somewhat Reasonable, check out our daily podcast on iTunes, in which one of our guests tonight has been a guest on our daily podcast. You can check out our YouTube page, in which this live-streamed event will be instantly archived for people to check out. And I hope that you see all of that to your liking. And you can talk to a Heartland staffer here more about Heartland Institute, and also how you can borrow books from our library. We're having a grand opening for our library in a couple of weeks. It is without a doubt the best collection of books about free markets and liberty in or around Chicago, and it grows with more great books each and every day. So if you're interested in researching the free market movement or learning more about liberty and reading the great books about liberty, you can do that here at the Heartland Institute, and we're happy to lend the books out to you. Also, summer is right around the corner as we are experiencing this fantastic weather. So if you have relatives in college who would like to be immersed in a think tank and kind of get immersed in the ideas business, that's what we're in. We're in the ideas business. We have plenty of room in this office space, and we're eager to get some interns in here this year and in years in the future to learn more about the freedom movement and to expand their experience as well. And if these are all things that are important to you, I hope that we could have your support so we can keep informing the public about, and elected officials, about freedom and liberty and free markets, and the importance of protecting these choices that we have, these choices that are ours. It should not be taken away in all areas of public life. We're now ready for the program, and called the Vaping Wars. And there's actually a bit of a victory on the Vaping Wars. Just yesterday afternoon, the House Appropriations Committee, Subcommittee on Agriculture, approved by a vote of 31 to 19, I think, instructing the Food and Drug Administration to not regulate vaping going back to all products presented before 2007. Instead, the regulation will begin when they set the rule, which of course is an enormous victory because 99% of all vaping products are post-2007. And so these are rare victories, and the Heartland Institute actually put out a press release today, and that's very happy news. So yay, happy news! But e-cigarettes are becoming increasingly popular, of course, especially among smokers who want to kick the habit, the tar and the hacking of cigarettes, but are seeking an alternative to patches and gum that hasn't worked for them. That's a good thing, right? Yep. Wrong. You're all wrong. If you're in the eyes of the government, you are all incorrect. Because many municipalities and government agencies think differently because they really don't know the facts, and we're going to learn a lot of facts tonight about the growing war on vaping. As governments want to treat vaping and e-cigarettes just like they do tobacco, even though there's no tobacco at all in an electronic cigarette. So what impact do the vaping wars have on science, on public policy, on business, on jobs, on your freedom? That's what we're going to learn about tonight with our two speakers. Our first speaker tonight is Brian Fotjik. He has served in both policy and political positions in various states, working for a United States Senator, a governor, a lieutenant governor, a secretary of state, a state senator, and a state representative. He's worked as director of government relations with a major consumer products company from 1996 to 2009, and currently serves as president of Brownstone Communications in Greater Chicago. And our second speaker tonight, and then after they both speak, it'll be a time for a very vigorous Q&A, I hope, is Victoria Vasconcellos. She is a former longtime smoker and the owner of Signot, which she established in 2009. Victoria has made it her mission to ensure that smokers receive support and affordable access to what she considers a life-changing option to smoking. She has personally assisted tens of thousands of smokers as they navigate the path to no longer smoking, and is a founding member of the Illinois chapter of the Smoke-Free Alternatives Trade Association, known as SAFTA. I'm sorry, SFATA. SAFTA. Thank you. So let's welcome both of our speakers tonight. And our first speaker to start us off, Brian Fotjik.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Welcome, and I'd like to thank the Heartland Institute for inviting me. I've done work in the past. Well, Jim mentioned a podcast that I was an interviewee. I also did some writing in the past for Heartland, and have had occasion to speak at some of their events, and I always recommend with new legislators around the country that they get in touch with the Heartland Institute and their various pillars of interest and experts so that they can be aware of issues, and it's just an incredible resource to have for them to be able to bring experts and impartial third-party experts to weigh in on different issues. And Heartland has also been engaged on tobacco harm reduction and vaping issues. One specific person I wanted to mention is Dr. Brad Radu, who's on the faculty at the University of Louisville Medical School. He's a friend of mine, and he's really a hero to me because he's recognized the concept of tobacco harm reduction and been working on it and writing about it from an academic perspective for decades. And he's really taken a beating for it. He really recognized that combustion of tobacco is what causes the health problems. Inhaling the products of combustion many times every day for many years is what causes almost all the health problems associated with tobacco. And his work primarily focused on smokeless tobacco, and he was able to study over a long period of time, I think 25 years in Sweden, as smokers transitioned away from combustible tobacco to get their nicotine and tobacco satisfaction from smokeless tobacco. And all the health impacts that we associate with smoking decreased proportionally with the decrease in smoking rates in Sweden. It's really a model. When they say there's no long-term science or people concerned about nicotine, a lot of that, all the work that we rely on now is really a result of people like Brad Radu, who is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute, and that's why I wanted to bring him up. And I would encourage you, he reminds me, he's a lot like Dr. Michael Siegel at Boston University. Both of them promote accurate, valid scientific inquiry into all of these subject areas. And the hard part is being willing to call out academic colleagues when they don't uphold the standards that we all expect and they don't reveal conflicts of interest. And that's also an area that Heartland is really excelled in a lot of different fields. So I'm excited to be here. 3 questions I wanted to confront today. First, the war on vaping. I would say, yes, we do have a war on vaping. I don't want to misuse the word war, but it truly is a public policy war. So I'm going to try to lay out a little bit about how we got here to the place we're at today. I'm going to raise some of the specific concerns that our adversaries bring up repeatedly. And I think everyone that's new to I've worked in tobacco for many years, smokeless tobacco, and I've worked on e-cigarette issues and public policy for many years. And one thing I try to educate people that are new to the vaping business and fighting government is that these people are not going to stop. The tobacco control folks have an issue of the week. They're going to run it. They're going to float any issue they can. If you confront their issue, you provide them with science, and they're going to move on and bring up other issues. And I think we've all seen the media reports in regard to vaping. So I'm going to try to walk through quickly, specifically, some of the concerns that they have raised in regard to e-cigarettes and vapor products. And I'd like to lay out a few of the specific types of proposals that we're seeing around the country from government, whether it's at the federal level, most of it at the state and local level. The first question is where are we and how did we get here? And this is a subject that I've raised in just talking about the concept of tobacco harm reduction. It really goes back 50 years in a big way to the 1964 Surgeon General's report on smoking and health, which really kind of put a marker down for the federal government in regard to officially recognizing smoking as coming with considerable health risks and laying out those risks and trying to have some sort of response that to address those concerns. What we've seen since then, we've seen taxes at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. If you look at the history of taxes, the Americans for Tax Reform has a tax map that you can look at where we're confronting tax issues from a vapor perspective because there's a limited number of people that use the products, and they continually have gone up. So what we've seen in the war on smoking is that we've seen taxes introduced everywhere, passed everywhere, and steadily increasing. We've seen smoking bans. We've seen education programs in various forms. In the purest, nicest form, they explain to people that it's not healthy to smoke and why, and encourage you to consider different options. But we've seen everything where kids learn at school how to go home and shame their parents and make them feel like miserable, dirty smokers. And fear campaigns, shock campaigns, billboards, quit lines. We've seen litigation, whether it be individual litigation, class action suits, and the biggest was a government action by the states. The Master Settlement Agreement, which probably most of you are familiar with, that settled one of those legal claims where the states are paying out a considerable amount of money, are being paid a considerable amount of money from the cigarette companies. And in addition to that, there's also a myriad of restrictions on advertising and marketing and the ways that you sell your products and market your products. And more recently, what we've seen is the FDA deeming regs that we're all still waiting to see the final rules come out. We've been waiting for years, and whenever anybody tells me they know when they're going to come out, it's usually the person who talks who doesn't know anything, and people who don't talk that might know something. But I've been hearing honestly for a year, well, we think it's 30 days they're going to come out, or they're going to come out before Christmas. We don't know, but at the end of the day, that's a 50-year campaign, comprehensive, plus million smokers in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control and the Lung Association and Cancer Society, over 450,000 people, they say, will die prematurely from smoking-related disease every year. Over 70% of smokers have an interest in quitting. A majority of them have tried to quit on multiple occasions. So the universe that we're dealing with when the vapor world has arisen is most of the people that smoke have smoked a long time, and raising taxes on them over and over and over hasn't stopped them. Educating them, scaring them, shaming them hasn't stopped them. Giving them FDA-approved nicotine replacement therapies like the gum and the patch, the nicotine inhaler, and prescription medications like Chantix hasn't helped these people. These are inveterate, hardcore smokers. And that's really where the vapor industry comes into the world. And I've been someone that has admired the work of the Heartland Institute and other organizations to promote freedom and liberty. I think people are best to make to sort through information and make choices. Nobody cares about a person's life more than that person. So it's always challenging when government tries to make decisions for people. And Heartland has really been a leader in that. And I'm a believer in the free market, and it's hard to know where we have free markets that still exist. There's been a lot of criticism about our pre-affordable healthcare system, and criticism at it like it's a free market problem, and it was anything but a free market system. But what I've seen that excites me about the vaping world is it truly is a free market. It's consumer driven. People recognize that smokers are interested in alternatives right now. They are interested in nicotine, and they have a wide variety of interests. And this 10 years ago, none of this existed. And now, I mean, it's hard to even keep track. There are numbers I see are, up to 15,000 or more vape shops that exist across the United States. Those are all new businesses. I don't know of many more industries that are growing like the vape industry. But those are jobs. They're paying income taxes. They're paying property taxes. They're paying sales taxes. They didn't exist before. And it's really the products that are offered are changing extremely rapidly. There are thousands of products out there, and there are thousands of components to different products, and everybody's trying to figure out, what do people want? Is there a significant number of people that want this or that? And it truly is the free market happening right before our eyes, and it happens to be solving a societal problem that the government has spent billions of dollars trying to solve and hasn't been able to solve. And then along come e-cigarettes. So next questions I have, why do they hate us, the vape community and advocates and supporters? And I mean, I think part of it gets down to the fact that people were taught to hate smokers for years. They hate smoking, but it's not limited to the activity. They have actually trained children from birth, it seems, in this country to despise smoking. Maybe that's a good thing, but also it's kind of translated to despise the dirty vermin of people that happen to smoke cigarettes. And I think that sort of has extended to vaping as well. And it's also, vaping is truly, the industry is a disruptive technology. It's disruptive to a number of different entrenched interests, and as much as anyone says they like change and they want change or they vote for hope and change, people are really uncomfortable with change, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but this technology that it's disrupted, I mean, I look at who it's disrupted, and I start with the government. It's disrupted because they're addicted to tobacco money. And whether it's cigarette taxes and smokeless tobacco taxes and master settlement annual payments that the cigarette companies give to the states, they're using not to promote health and save people's lives, but they're building bridges and doing whatever it is they want to do with that money. So the cigarette tax revenues have been declining consistently over a long period of time. Now, the tobacco master settlement agreements to the states are also dependent upon cigarette sales. So if you sell less Marlboro in Illinois, well, Altria, the owner of Marlboro, will talk to the state and say, we sold less cigarettes this year, so we want $100 million back from what we gave you, and they get it back. So states are finding themselves pinched by people not smoking, and that's disruptive to them. Other entities that are disrupted are tobacco control and public health. They've pretty much done everything you can do to the cigarette industry. I mean, they've raised the taxes, you can't smoke here. It's just, and this has come along, and it's actually moving smokers away from smoking. And when your whole life only exists to work 40 hours a week to tell people not to smoke, and to access grant money to develop programs to tell people not to smoke, and someone comes along out of left field and just offers an alternative and it's working, that's really a significant and significantly funded entity that is disrupted. The third I would list is pharmaceutical companies. Been a few references today to nicotine replacement therapy, the gum, the patch, the nicotine inhaler, prescription medications to help people stop smoking. The reality is, at least in terms of the NRTs, they fail over 93% of the time. These are FDA-approved products. We're often asked, well, why don't you just become FDA-approved e-cigarettes? Well, it might cost you $20 or $30 million to be approved. And there's one statement I heard, it was actually at a Heartland event, and I can't remember the scientist's name, but he told a story about the guy that invented the catalytic converter and explained what a significant development it was and how it would help with automobiles and pollution and everything else. And then the government mandated that every car include one of those. And he said, wasn't that the best day of your life? Your invention was mandated by the government. And the guy said, no, it wasn't the best day. It was one of the worst days, because I thought it was a really neat idea and it helped, but once the government says everybody's got to have this, then innovation completely stops. And that's one of the real concerns about what's happening at the federal level with FDA, even with the changes. I mean, through that path, I don't think any products have ever been approved. The system was set up to stop any new tobacco products from coming to market. So you'll spend millions and millions of dollars trying to get something approved, and shops, like Vicky owns several shops, and you have all the different lines, SKUs of e-liquids, different nicotine levels, different flavors. Each one of those, even a different size bottle of the same exact liquid, would require a different approval. So what happens is innovation completely shuts down, and the pharmaceutical companies where this started, they kind of have a nice little racket because they're subsidized by the government. Well, first of all, they're not taxed. They're exempt from all these taxes, even the vapor taxes. They say products containing nicotine, and then the exception is unless they're FDA approved. So they're not taxed. They're regularly subsidized either directly by the government, or they're mandated to be included in insurance coverage, or they're provided for all public employees in their health plans. So you get free gum. Well, it's free for you, but the pharmaceutical companies are getting paid. And you use your gum and it doesn't work, and then you go back to smoking. And 6 months later, you might have mandated coverage, and you get the patch for free. And the pharmaceutical companies are getting paid and they're getting repeat customers that are coming back after failing. But those products fail over 93% of the time. I think Chantix can be have a higher rate, but people are understandably concerned about trying it because they know of the side effects of the medication. So that's an issue there. And the last one I mentioned about disruption is cigarette companies. And they understandably are disrupted that people sell a lot of cigarettes in this country. If consumers are choosing a different product, that disrupts their model. And I think what they've done is recognized the credibility of this category and started to invest in it and want to be a part of it. Oftentimes our concerns fall in the same place and we work together. Oftentimes we have different interests, and I think anybody going into it should go in with open eyes. But those are 4 powerful, entrenched interests that have all been disrupted because of the rise of electronic cigarettes. In terms of the issues that are being raised to confront the products, like I said, they will bring up something new as long as they exist. But one of them is secondhand vapor, and secondhand vapor is not benign, but it has never been demonstrated to cause any health concerns. You could compare it to cigarette smoking, and it doesn't even compare. And I discourage people from doing that too widely because cigarette smoking is already banned and despised everywhere. You don't even have to compare it to cigarettes. You can compare it to sitting on a street corner and waiting for the bus stop or breathing the air in downtown Chicago, and that's a more apt comparison. But if you look at anything that is related to health impacts and OSHA standards of clean air in a workplace and everything like that, there's never been any concern about secondhand vapor. It's been admitted. I was in New York City when they passed their vaping ban, and even their health commissioner, when pressed, said, yeah, there is no science to support this. We don't have any science. It's just, he said, we have trouble with enforcing our existing smoking ban because, gosh, people might be using products and we don't know what they're doing. And the idea of renormalizing smoking, which I'll bring up. Nicotine health risks is another issue. Nicotine has gotten a really, really, really bad rap because smokers, in one reason they smoke, I wouldn't say that it's the only reason at all, but is to get nicotine and get it delivered in the way it is. And smoking is not good for you. But people have translated that concern about health impacts of smoking to nicotine, and it's not a valid concern, but it is a real one. Nicotine is comparable to caffeine on its impact on you. If I drink a pot of coffee and get a little shaky, I know to stop, maybe not have another cup of coffee, and it reacts the same way with me. And there are a small number of people that are at higher risks if you have certain heart conditions, but it's a very small number, and it is not a substance that is dangerous to the extent that people associate it and confuse it with smoking. The other is nicotine addiction. What we're learning about nicotine addiction is that cigarettes, everything that we've looked at over the years, it seems, and a lot of the studies over the past couple of decades of nicotine and impacts are all understandably associated with smoking. So people assumed, they drew conclusions about nicotine and its impact on the body based on studies of smoking. What we're learning, though, is if you use smokeless tobacco, if you use nicotine replacement therapy, if you use different e-cigarette products, your body absorbs nicotine in different ways. And people throw around words like addiction. That's been one of my pet peeves of is this idea that, well, you're still addicts. And I think, well, you can't go into a bar and say everybody there that has a beer is an addict. And I think as a health professional, there's probably pretty reckless use of language and irresponsible language to refer to people that way, but it certainly is an issue they're driving. Nicotine poisoning. There have been a couple of incidents around the country where a kid or a pet has gotten a hold of nicotine. I think the one that I'm most familiar with was in New York State. There's a big confusion between e-liquid, which most of you know, that use the products that you put into your device, which has a very small percentage diluted amount of nicotine in the high percentage pure nicotine that you put into the liquid. So honestly, the tobacco control advocates will use anything and everything to create fear. Really high temperatures to produce formaldehyde, but they were at such temperatures that no one could ever in a million years use the products that way. No one ever would. There's even a term in the vaping community, it's called a dry hit. If you got it for 1/10 of 1 second, you stop. It's battery safety is a legitimate issue. We've seen a few incidents recently, and it is a concern. Not a concern in most products, but people should, and I encourage shops to educate people depending on the types of products people are using. Carcinogens and toxicants are present in everything. The question, the dose makes the poison is a commonly used phrase, and just finding the mere existence in minuscule amounts of some chemical does not necessarily mean the product is of concern, and they haven't demonstrated that any of these products have toxicants or carcinogens in any level of concern. Others are heavy metals, lung irritation. A big one that they fall back on is risks to the population. Once you lose every argument, on every scientific basis, you say, I mean, they rely on the precautionary principle, which is very familiar to people in the sort of health policy world, and I consider it a pure evil and an anti-freedom. It basically says, well, let's ban it until you can prove that it's safe without a doubt and will never harm anybody anywhere. And they've used these risks to the population saying, well, sure, it's not as bad as smoking. Sure, it doesn't have risks that should make alarm us to a great extent, but maybe we should just ban it or heavily restrict it because who knows what might happen. Maybe people who are going to quit smoking will continue to smoke because they'll use these products. Maybe new people who never would have smoked will use these products and then become smokers. That's the gateway argument, which we see in drug policy. I see a lot of consistency between a lot of our issues and our drug policy. But the idea that if you use this, well, you're going to start with this, and you're going to be hooked on nicotine, then you're going to want to smoke the real thing, and you're going to smoke cigarettes, and then you're going to die. So we should, but the science all demonstrates the exact opposite, that the people that use the products, up to 99% of them are current smokers or former smokers, and the path of the population to and from these products is that people are using these products to move away from combustible tobacco, not to move for it. We've seen flavor concerns, and it's interesting. I understand the reaction. People see interesting flavors and think, well, these are people as well that have never smoked. I question whether they've ever smiled, or maybe once a year they smile. They don't want people to have fun. They don't want adults to enjoy something. And when they see it happening, they have great concerns and they need to step up. And flavors is where that plays in. And everybody who's a vapor understands it, even smokers. Vicki could tell you a lot of these folks own businesses. If a smoker comes into your shop, they all think, well, I don't want any of this fruity flavor. I just want tobacco flavor or menthol. That's what I smoke. And that's an easy transition. So it makes sense that you offer those flavors. For me, I smoked for 28 years. I'm about 3.5 years smoke-free, and I use these products with a wide variety of flavors. It's just like anything else. People like certain kinds of desserts. There are things I can vape that I can't eat because I'll get fat. But honestly, I can vape Bananas Foster after dinner and have a cup of coffee. I don't want to vape scotch in the morning, but I might want to vape it at night. Apple pie is nice, but I don't want to eat apple pie every day, nor do I want to vape it every day. But everybody is different. Everybody has a different palate. Everybody has different tastes. People are having fun. creating exciting new things and trying to identify the consumer demand that exists and latch onto something. And it's exciting, and that just really bothers a lot of people. So they assume if it's an exciting, fun flavor, it must be for children. I go to the pharmacy. We did this a few years ago when I worked in smokeless tobacco, and they were trying to ban flavors. But we had a table, like one of these, filled up with products from the pharmacy, and it's, Metamucil and gummy calcium, and it's all of these products that are clearly designed for adults, often senior citizens, and they're flavored. People like flavors. Now I'm going to run through some of what we've seen at the state level. I mentioned the FDA regulation. We've seen, and the industry has supported bans on sales of these products to minors. One point worth mentioning is the only groups that I've seen oppose bans on sales to minors are the tobacco control groups, the public health groups. They fought it in Michigan. I mean, we fought for it. Everybody in the industry did. Thousands and thousands of consumers writing letters saying, pass a law, ban the sale of these products to minors. We're concerned that they not be defined as tobacco products, because they're not, and we don't want to get swept into every law that's been passed to affect tobacco, but we support ban on sale to minors. And in 2 states, Michigan and Missouri, we fought, and the governor actually, bills were passed, and it was the Cancer Society and the Lung Association that got the governor to veto a bill to ban sales to minors. Why? Because it's not regulating enough, it's not taxing enough, it's a Trojan horse. And the reality is, what they've demonstrated through this fight is they would rather use children to promote their political ends than to actually protect children and take them out of the equation. Taxes we've seen everywhere. As I mentioned, Americans for Tax Reform, they have a map online. I believe it was just updated. Last year we had 26 taxes in states that we fought. I think currently there are 11 that are alive right now. We've defeated most of them. One of the problems that I mentioned earlier about government being disrupted, they're seeing cigarette tax revenues decline. They want that money. They're addicted to it. And they're seeing master settlement payments to the states decline. So they think, well, gosh, I've heard about this multi-billion-dollar e-cigarette industry. We need to create a tax on those guys because we're going to backfill our hole from lost tobacco revenue. The reality is there is no model that would allow them to do that. If you take ethics and good health policy out of it, there's no way to tax these products to raise the money they want, because the neighboring state doesn't have a tax. The products are widely available through adult approved transactions online. People are already moving. You can buy cigarettes on almost every street corner in America, every gas station, convenience store, pharmacy, grocery store. People that use these products get in their car and drive 15 or 20 minutes to find what they need. And if their shop next to them doesn't have it, they go further, or they order it online and wait a few days. So there's several states that have passed taxes. Minnesota has a tax. North Carolina, Louisiana. There are, I believe, 7 municipal governments that have taxes. D.C., Chicago, a bunch in Alaska. But there really is no way to tax these that makes sense. Excise taxes are, in theory, created, they're otherwise called sin taxes, to discourage people from doing what they believe to be an unhealthy behavior with bad impacts. They're applied to cigarettes and tobacco, beer, wine, liquor, gasoline. And the idea is if there's a tax on it, people will consume a little bit less of it, so there'll be less negative impact. And if they consume a certain amount of it and there is a negative impact on healthcare costs or pollution, that we're getting some money that we can theoretically use to respond to those problems that are caused by the consumption. Well, these products are not demonstrated to cause harm. You can make a very strong argument that they mitigate harm caused by smoking. So it doesn't make sense from a public health perspective, and there's no way to do it from a fiscal perspective. Sometimes they want to tax it if it includes nicotine. And you go, okay, well, nicotine is what's bad then. And they go, yeah, we got to, because nicotine's addictive. So the ones with more nicotine in them, we should tax more. And the little cig-alike products like these have the highest concentration of nicotine in them. But if you're a 30-year smoker and you're transitioning, you need some nicotine. So you think you should tax the products higher that are going to most benefit long-term smokers. And they go, well, no, I don't want to do that. Maybe we shouldn't. And they run around, then they go, well, we're going to tax the whole thing. Every device in there. And the reality is most of those, the parts of the devices you can buy at any hardware store. You can buy it at Walmart. Are you going to tax organic cotton and wire and screws? And it's just completely unworkable. Yes. Yeah. Usage bans, flavor bans, and restrictions, defining these products as tobacco products, licensing and regulation, usually designed to keep other people out of the market. And the worst legislation we've seen in the country wasn't just introduced, it was passed, and it was passed in Indiana by good Republicans. Horrible, horrible piece of legislation. They tried to pass it in Georgia this year. That one threw everyone off guard because it has about 50 different pieces of it that weren't clear to anyone. But really what it does is it sets up a monopoly. It creates a security framework and required government approval such that only one company in Indiana can be the security company to allow liquid manufacturers to get approved and sell. And if they don't want to take any more customers, they won't. That's being litigated right now, but those are good conservative Republican friends in Indiana that passed the worst bill in the country, worse than California, worse than Massachusetts, Indiana, if anyone's listening online. The real risk does not come from not regulating these products. The real risk comes from regulating them too much. And I think that public policymakers should try to work with the vape community and understand the dynamic that's occurring before they legislate. And there's three qualities I think they should encourage in anything they do, or at least not impede. And I think products need to be affordable for people to use them. And that means taxes are a no-no. Additional taxes are a no-no. And it also means that when you create heavy regulatory burdens that are too expensive for businesses to comply with, that drive up the price of the product, well, if somebody can buy a pack of cigarettes for $6, you don't want the alternative product with no tobacco and no combustion to cost $9, or fewer people are going to be willing to make that choice. Products should be available. I mentioned that cigarettes are sold everywhere across America. It's a great country. I think that's a wonderful thing. But these products are not available. People are willing to work and fight to get the products they want and wait and travel and drive. And when you restrict them and over-regulate them, they're going to be that much more difficult to get. And the last part is an important one, is that products should be appealing for the adults who use them. One thing we've mentioned today is that these are not tobacco products. Government does not understand that, and they want to regulate them exactly the same as a cigarette. It's bad policy. The other important thing that's forgotten is these are not medicines. I think there's a mindset in public health and tobacco control such that, you take the gum not because you enjoy it, but because you're suffering from a medical condition. You're addicted to smoking. We're going to give you some medicine and make it tolerable for you, like, flu medicine, so you can drink a shot of NyQuil and get to sleep and feel better. But the reality is these products do not work. They're not medicines. They're not designed to solve any medical condition. They only work if people enjoy them. And the ways people enjoy them is they can find the devices that work for them, and they can find the flavors that they enjoy. And products are coming out constantly and evolving, and people's tastes are changing. I know I've gone over my time. I was given some permission to do that. But I think those are some of the overview of the dynamic that's occurring. And I do a lot of work with the vape community, and every organization with SAFADA. CASA represents consumers. Vista's another group that works with businesses. There are other, and I try to help folks explain, how do you approach a legislator? How do you talk to them? How do you talk about these issues? And I encourage people to be respectful, understand that legislators are bombarded by all of these crazy news stories that we all see. We pull our hair out about. They don't know much about it. They're experts in a couple things. They deal with hundreds of different issues. So be patient with them. Be respectful. Tell your story. And become a friend, and hold their hand and let them like you so they want to talk to you again, and lead them along the path. And to the public health community, I would remind them, it hasn't happened yet, but it's important to remember that there's estimated up to 9 or 10 million vapors in the United States of America, and those people are the public in public health. So rather than declare war on 10 million people and 40 million prospective people who might move here, rather than declare war and try to win, why don't you sit down with the vaping community and people that use these products, try to understand, how long did you smoke? What are you using? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Maybe learn something. And I know that the vapor community is extremely interested in real science. And there's nobody better at it. And there's nobody better at staying on top of the science that comes out and sharing information. We want real science. We want safe products. We want safety and efficacy, anything that can be improved to make the products better. The entire vape community supports that. But that's not what we're seeing now. We're seeing people put out pseudoscience and nonsense in an effort to villainize 10 million people and then villainize an entire segment of products to put them out of business. And that's really, to me, not public health. It's fighting the public. And I'll be happy to take questions with Vicki. But Vicki is up next, and Vicki is a friend. I'm glad that she could be here today. I visited and shopped at some of her vape shops, and I've been honored to work with her, not only in Illinois, but around the country. And I know it's a frustration for some business owners in the community that some people step up and write the check and get organized and hire a lobbyist and bring everybody to a meeting. But Vicki is somebody I greatly, greatly admire and respect for her, getting behind the effort and organizing people and explaining why it matters and why fighting this should be an investment. It's part of your business model. So I'll turn it over to Vicki, but that's...
Well, thank you guys for coming out, and thank you, Brian, and thanks for having us here. And I don't know that I can add much to what Brian said. I read something the other day, and it was about this precautionary principle that the public health seems to speak to legislators about. And what I read was that restricting access to e-cigs is like locking the fire exit door because you fear that the landing outside might be wet and slippery. And I thought that was brilliant. I think that I would tell you that the vendors we have in this room, we're resilient. As laws pass, we figure out workarounds. Most of these products are adopted from other technologies, and as things are set in our path, we will find a way to serve our consumers. Signot began that way. I thought that the FDA was heavy-handed in how they were treating vapor products in 2009, and I thought that many smokers wouldn't go the extra mile to be able to get them in, so I made it my mission to do so because as many smokers needed to know about these as possible. I'm going to rush us into the Q&A because I think, Brian, really, you did cover a good deal of stuff. No, not at all. Not at all. It was fabulous. But there may be a lot of questions, and I really want to get to the Q&A part of it.
May I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Victoria? Well, we were talking earlier, but from a business owner's perspective, doing business in the greater Chicago area, what decisions made either by the city or Cook County have affected your business decisions and future planning?
Well, mine personally, December 30th, I had a minivan run around and pick up all nicotine from my Cook County stores. The reason being is that I had to pull a tobacco license. And while it is absolutely principle to not pull one because I sell no tobacco, I was also fearing that once they label me a tobacco store, my customers would later be taxed on things like batteries and cotton balls. So Signot did that in Cook County. I know that Chicago has done workarounds with the tax in that they sell higher milligram nicotine in smaller quantities, and their larger bottles of e-liquid are zero, because both in Cook County and in Chicago, the nicotine is taxed per milliliter. We've seen a big failure, I believe it was Maryland?
Yes.
There was a
Montgomery County?
there was a tax done, and it's they expected millions of dollars, and they've gotten, and these are numbers I don't know, 175,000. It's been a miserable failure. When they zig, we zag. This has been a consumer-driven industry, and we will do what we can to protect our consumers. And I think the businesses out there, we're just simply resilient. They're going to have a hard time keeping up with us.
Okay. This is for you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Vicki. Excellent. You all can't see this because we're not showing the live stream on a big screen in this room, but the chat room, all you guys out there, is extremely happy today. In fact, one of the comments in the chat room is, all the vaping celebrities are here. So that's extremely exciting. And as I mentioned in the chat, please put question in all caps so that I can easily find it in a fast-moving chat and ask it to our group. In fact, here's one right here from someone called Crappy Guitarist. Hello, Crappy Guitarist. I think you're selling yourself short, but I haven't heard you. He says simply, what can the little guy do to help?
I recommend that everybody who discovers these products and discovers they have a positive impact on your own life or someone you love, that you join CASA. It's the Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association. We're horrible with all of our... And that's from an individual perspective. The one thing that they do, they have their database right now, I think, is over 135,000 members. And they are kept abreast of what's going on at the local level to the extent we can follow it. It's very difficult at the state level, at the federal level, and they use a system to target communications from consumers to elected officials to let them know. And from a business perspective, I'll turn it over to Vicki to answer.
Well, in Illinois, we have SFATA, and certainly join SFATA and, meet with your local legislators. That's so important, because while we have a lobbyist at the state level who's an incredible asset and keeps us apprised of things, where they're picking us off is in the municipalities and in the counties. It's really important where you do business and where you live that you connect with your local government and keep them apprised and keep them educated. In legislative meetings, the words I hear the most out of the public health is, we just don't know. Well, help them know. The science is out there. They're just not being delivered it. And the public health departments have contact with our legislators constantly. That's what they do for a living. We need to do that. We need for them to want to court our vote.
What is SFATA?
The Smoke-Free Alternatives Trade Association.
Don't you remember? I was corrected on that earlier. All right. And if you have a question here in the audience, please just raise your hand, and Lindsay will come around with the microphone so that people on the live stream can hear the question. Ma'am.
So in line with dealing with your local officials, so say, for example, I go to a Board of Trustees meeting in my little village of Mount Prospect. Because in my little village, where they've tried to generate a lot of, well, all they've generated is failing businesses because they built these condos in downtown Mount Prospect with shops underneath, and they're all empty, and someone goes in for a month and it's empty again. But anyway, so some of these restaurants, you know, they're putting up these little circles now. In addition to no guns and no smoking, they've got no vaping, you know, these little symbols. So let's say I'm going to go to a board meeting with the trustees, and I'm going to say why this isn't necessary. What kind of information, how do I get help as to how to outline what I tell them?
I would tell you to go to your local vape shop, and they can guide you, or CASA, go on to the CASA website. But if you go to them, they can go with you. They can contact me. I would go with you and just support you. I mean, you're a resident there, and many of us know the science behind it. It's a public perception thing, and it's just about education. They don't know. They're being taught to fear it. You know, we're addicting children. We're luring them in with gummy bears. They don't know. Their fears are genuine because what they're being told is just simply not true. So contact us. We'll be there.
There's one right there. Let me take another online question while Lindsay makes her way over to Mark. Actually, a couple of people asked this question. Nox Noir and the second person was Viri Bowering. Okay. Anyway, they both had a similar question. Can be summed up. How can we counter the direct access the alphabet groups in Washington have with politicians that they use to promote junk science about vaping? I think maybe that, and there's a couple questions on the chat room, kind of how to get organized and, you know, stop the shop drama and all that stuff. But, you know, how does the vaping community get together to have the kind of influence that is necessary, frankly, in Washington to prevent bad things?
I will answer that. I think there's been a couple of perspectives that are, one, people look at groups like Pharma, which is an organization made up of pharmaceutical companies to represent their shared interests when they have them. It was carefully built over many years, over a long period of time. So people look at the vaping community and say, well, why don't we have that? And they get frustrated because there truly are different groups. It is a new industry. And people are frustrated by the fact that there are different groups. But I can tell you as well, from a lengthier perspective, I've worked on tobacco harm reduction for smokeless tobacco for many years. And, you know, 15 years ago, if we could get one line in a horrible, horrible article in the New York Times that was usually misguided and misleading, if not outright false, if we could get one line that just said, and so said that it might be less harmful to use a non-combustible product versus a cigarette, we saw that as a victory. Things have improved a lot. There's still a long way to go. But one thing that's made a difference with the Cancer Society, the Heart and Lung Association, every county smoke-free tobacco control organization is when we show up at these hearings, and there's a room full of 20 or 30 vapors, 10 or 15 of those know all the science. They know all the studies that are out there. They know the critiques of the studies that have been made. They know a hell of a lot more than the person who's been representing the Cancer Society for Cook County and showing up at her hearings and reading her testimony that was sent in from Washington, D.C. The reality is they recognize it too. So I've noticed, in Massachusetts, even places where there's just aggressive government intrusion into the world, and they pull back because they know if I get up there and lie, I've got a room full of people that know a lot more about this than I do. So I've noticed that. I've also noticed that researchers and academics that put out bullshit, science, they're getting called on it. So if you put out a bad study or a misleading study, or you're drawing conclusions and putting out a press release that has nothing to do with what your actual study or paper was, somebody in our community will have it a day in advance, and it'll be embargoed, and they'll give a comment to the press. But those things go out, and people, it gives pause to them. They're not used to being confronted on Twitter. It drives them nuts. When Chicago passed the vaping ban, they were so frustrated by hearing from all these vapors that they commissioned a study of social media. And I think they spent $35,000 to say, well, who's paying for this? They don't believe real people. I've worked in big industry, and people pay a lot of money to create the perception that you have a groundswell and grassroots activism. And what we have in the vapor community is no money, no real formal organization across the board, but you have a lot of passionate people that have been beaten down for being smokers for years and years, and they finally found a path that they feel good about, that's working for them and improved their lives, and they're standing up. It's a genuine grassroots movement that's occurring, and it's growing, and it's educated, and it's electronically connected. So I would say we're making progress, and it's been substantive. And when you question an academic's paper, those people were the white hats. If you're against smoking and you put anything out there, nobody's going to criticize you and beat you up for villainizing smoking, but that's not the case anymore. And it gives pause to some people that are concerned perhaps about the reputation, and it also encourages people. I mentioned Dr. Radu. He's willing to write a paper and say, here's why these 3 studies or this statement from the Centers for Disease Control are misleading or completely false, and lay it out. And he did that, and he was really dealt a negative impact to his life by doing that. If you take on the Cancer Society and the Heart Lung Association and the Tobacco Control, they come after you. They came after him, but he never wavered. That's why he's one of my heroes, is he weathered through this storm, and he's sort of being proven right now. But Dr. Siegel at Boston University, David Sweener in Ottawa, I believe, Clive Bates, who ran Action in Smoking and Health in the UK. These people have credibility, and they're willing to stand up, and I think we have truth on our side, and we just need to keep going, and we will win.
And somebody just commented on Twitter that it's people like Brian and Vicky that make the vaping community so great. And I would have to agree, isn't that sweet? No, it doesn't say mom. Christopher Scheller, actually, so you can thank him. But before we get back to Mark, and everybody should identify themselves when they're asking a question too, so that we know who we're speaking with. But looking at the crowd here, looking at the amazing activity on the chat room, Google just the word vape, and then vaping, and then you see thousands of Facebook pages from vendors, from manufacturers, from fans. People have entire pages dedicated to vaping. It's a real community. People who use the patch are not a community. People who chew Nicorette gum are not a community. I would like both of you, maybe starting with Vicky, since you've been in the business in the business of vaping since 2009. Why is there a vaping community? Why has it created such a movement that other products or other industries don't have?
Because we were all we had. And where we used to dwell was the e-cigarette forum. And it's still the largest group, and I think they cleared 15 million messages last year. Because vaping saved our life. And this is something we've had to do. It's a consumer solution to our own problem. This didn't come from public health, and in fact, the obstruction we've gotten from public health just makes us bond tighter. And we're locking arms, and I mean, I think that we're saving our lives, and they want to balance their budget with our lives, and we're just not going to be accepting of that.
Vicky would never be my friend but for vaping, so I'm very grateful.
All right, terrific. In the back there.
My name is Mark Block. I drove down from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I have to really agree with Brian, the fact that this is a movement 10 million strong and will become quite a political force. Some of you may remember me. I was the infamous smoking man in Herman Cain's presidential commercial. I ran his campaign, and Since then, I've acquired the asset of a company called Smoke Safely, and I did go from 3 packs a day down to 3 cigarettes a day, so it is saving my life. But I want to make a statement on the coal bill that recently passed the appropriations. Like everything in Washington, and I spend a lot of time in Washington, as I'm sure Brian does, the devil's in the detail. There are 4 things that in the coal bill that you got to watch out for. One is the Secretary of HHS and FDA want standards of the batteries of the products. It's going to prohibit advertising in newspapers, magazines, and periodicals, the vaping products, other than adult publications. Vapor products can only be sold face-to-face, specifically vending machines, mail orders, and we're still trying to determine if it will ban internet sales. And retailers will be required to register with the Secretary of HHS. The group that I'm beginning my association with is working closely with the groups like Savada and the others, the Electronic Vaping Coalition of America, and we'll be supporting a bill that soon will be introduced by Congressman Duncan Hunter from California that will address taking the regulations out of the tobacco group in the FDA. So again, yes, it was a great victory to have that passed appropriations, but really watch what these people in Washington do, because it could end up being worse than what you think.
It never ends up being better.
All right. Another question out there? Raise your hand, please. All right, I have a question then. So we get ready. Should the the big question about the FDA going to step in and regulate vaping products? It's been a sharpened axe poised over the industry for quite a while. Just a basic question: should the FDA be in the business of regulating vaping products? And if not, why not?
That's tricky because while it does deal with inhalation, it is a technology product. I think they probably could, but the industry has to be a part of it. I don't think that they understand. I mean, I'm sure there's battery regulations now, right? But the FDA doesn't do it, I don't believe. Right?
Yeah, and it's kind of a loaded question. I mean, I can give you what I believe is that it will not help. And then that gets back to the idea that the real threat is over-regulating, not under-regulating these products. We've all been waiting for the deeming regs, the final rule to come down. I assume there will be multiple legal challenges to it. I'm not an expert on it. I believe the real nexus by which the FDA expanded its jurisdiction was having nicotine in the products. And then we've seen it expand, like Mark mentioned. It is a genuine concern. If you're talking about batteries, I think that we were primed to have a fight if the deeming reg is talking about wires and cotton and devices that are essentially electronically the same thing as a flashlight. And you can buy everything at a hardware store. So there are legal questions that I assume will be fought out after, and there are concerns about expanding it. I don't think. Let me explain the predicate date. The piece that everyone is celebrating that was passed by committee yesterday is a good piece. And the predicate date, when the FDA established its rules in dealing with cigarettes and tobacco, the way it was created, they said at the time, well, we're going to take all these cigarettes and products that are on the market, they're all going to be legal. And here's a whole body of rules and regulations that they're going to have to comply with. So what the vaping community has said is, well, you should give us that same benefit. Because the way you have things structured, that goes back to, I believe, 2007. So there really are no products that were in existence before then. And if there are one or two, the devices are so archaic They're not anything anyone's using now. So if that, I mean, it really wouldn't matter if one of those were approved. So this does bring all the products in, but it still will have them heavily regulated, and it will completely stop innovation. And one of the most exciting things that's been occurring in this marketplace is if somebody can find a way to deal with the safety issue, make liquids that match. Some people are sensitive to propylene glycol, which is in liquid. Some people are sensitive to vegetable glycerin. You can determine that and find what you want. But innovation will cease, from my perspective, because once you're approved, those are the products that are going to be out there. To get a new product out is too expensive and maybe impossible, because the system is designed to not allow any new products to come to market.
Vapor products should have their own category.
Nancy Thorner. I'm a little bit confused, never having smoked or even tried to smoke. I don't know anything about nicotine. I've always heard it's very addictive. But how in smoking these e-cigarettes can you stop smoking if it doesn't have any nicotine in? I just don't understand it. I know it works. People say it does, but I don't understand it. I can't comprehend how it could work.
Smoking cigarettes and your compulsion to do so, there's many reasons for it. Part of it's habitual. It may be the sensation in your lungs, and it's different for every person. That's why, we have 20-some hundred products in my stores, because it's a different thing for everyone. The taste of it, how it tastes with your morning coffee. Nicotine certainly is part of it. The nicotine in vapor products, it doesn't have the MAO inhibitors like they do in tobacco. So there isn't that, I felt personally, there isn't that compulsion. When you smoke, there's a compulsion for the next one. It's an urgency. And I don't have that same kind of urgency with this nicotine. So how it could work is that, again, it's so many facets that how many do you need to change to, this alternative product? How many facets do you have to have filled of your need?
So they do have some nicotine in the e-cigarettes?
It can or cannot.
But the thing is, I was thinking the way it might work is if you can buy solutions that reduce the nicotine each time, uncut skim milk and no-fat milk, get used to it.
And you
so
can.
might not need it anymore.
Correct, you can, but that's a personal decision. That is your personal freedom, if you want to reduce your nicotine intake or not.
Yeah, and we are learning a lot about nicotine, and we made assumptions about nicotine based on smoking and the way nicotine enters your body and hits your brain from smoking a cigarette. So we made assumptions about nicotine. Then when nicotine replacement therapies came out and there were extensive studies done on long-term impacts and things like that, we learned a lot more about nicotine. And with e-cigarettes, we're learning more as well, that what we assume about the addictiveness and the traits associated with the chemical are not all the same, and it's impacted by the delivery system. Even within the e-cigarette vapor category, you have products like this that are small and meant to simulate a cigarette. So it's a common feeling for a smoker. They have very higher concentrations of nicotine in a tiny amount of liquid, but you don't produce a ton of vapor. Products like this, you can produce a lot of vapor, but generally people that use them use a lot less nicotine. And people, I think, and I've worked with tobacco companies and cigarettes, smokeless companies, e-cigarette companies. People make assumptions about these products as if you're a smoker, but once you stop smoking and start vaping, you don't behave like a smoker anymore, and people use the products differently, and they're learning that. Even independent e-cig companies that I work for, Enjoy, they had assumptions, and they thought, well, everybody wants a product that tastes like a cigarette, and a menthol cigarette or a regular cigarette, because that's what they smoke. But for me, when I used it, I said, I want something that tastes not like I thought I liked the way cigarettes tasted. It turned out I didn't. I wanted something that tasted nothing like a cigarette, and I didn't want to remind myself, and I honestly get uncomfortable with something that feels like a cigarette. But everybody is different in, right.
We can reduce the caffeine every single time so she doesn't drink coffee.
Mhm.
Nicotine isn't any worse for you than caffeine. So maybe we should reduce the caffeine every single time a cup of coffee so that you don't drink coffee anymore.
Right.
Okay, so go have 2 days without coffee and you'll have the worst headache of your life.
I can attest to that, believe me.
Right. Right, well, no, I'm just making a point that one is very similar to the other in terms, as a matter of fact, caffeine is more toxicity than nicotine, so the caffeine might actually be worse for you than the nicotine.
Oh,
But
sure.
you drink a coffee every day, or quite a few cups like myself, and so maybe we should just keep cutting down the caffeine so that we don't drink it anymore. And
Well-
that's the point I'm making.
Well, that's so true.
There is caffeine in decaf,
True.
as we all know as
True,
well.
but that's so true, but what about the marijuana, where they legalize marijuana and yet they don't allow people to smoke cigarettes? This is
Right.
very foolish too.
Oh, I agree with you. Nice world we live in. Right, no kidding.
Nancy, that was on my list of questions. You just blew it for me. All right, we'll get to that later. Mike, identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm from McHenry County. We had an issue in McHenry County where Crystal Lake tried to ban it in all indoor areas. We packed the council chambers. We stopped that. But the hardest part about doing that was herding cats, if you will. All these different, there's a lot of different shops in the McHenry County area, specifically in and around Crystal Lake itself. How do you recommend me as a consumer, I'm not a shop owner, kind of convince all these different shops to put aside the shop drama, come together for the common good, and show up and work together and form that organization, form the Voltron, if you will, and take on those local governments?
Herding cats is a good way to put it. I think that our independence as shop owners is part of our strength. And, we're always looking at it as a weakness, and it is like herding wild cats. But there will be those that rise up and will join and understand the importance of uniting and putting down that drama. I've always viewed my fellow shops as teammates. I mean, I could never service every smoker in Illinois. I could never do it. We need each other, and we need each other to stand together. And as a consumer, you have a great deal of power. If you go into a shop and they're not pulling their weight with, CASA or SAFADA or VTA or whatever, you as a consumer have a decision to make based on their business practice.
Vote with your dollar.
You betcha. And they'll feel that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Great. All right, I have another question here from online. Joshua Dalrymple, thank you for this question in the chat room. Other than the fear of losing vaping altogether, what are some other ways that we can get consumers excited about advocacy? I think maybe what that's getting at is, if you're not in the vaping community and you're not a former smoker, or, if it's not involved in your life, how do you get people excited about advocating for this freedom-centric idea?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult question and a difficult challenge, but I think it is critical to our ability to succeed. The reality is, over years of what I talked about, that people don't like smokers. I said, tobacco control, maybe you would be more effective if you didn't despise smokers and disrespect them and treat them like crap. The reality is, though, in the vaping community, what we have, 99% or as high as that, are former smokers. And when we're comparing vaping in a bar to smoking in a bar, we're comparing it to something that the general population is already disgusted with and doesn't like. So the real challenge is, how do you broaden that coalition? And there are efforts that have been ongoing, and Heartland is a great example of that groups that support the free market versus government control. There are natural ways to explain the issue, to say, you know what, this is freedom. This is the free market. Consumers are making decisions. People are creating businesses to respond to their wants and needs, and they're generating economic activity and creating jobs, and that's a good thing. But there are arguments as well that you can use with the center-left groups. And I actually, of the states that I spent a lot of time in the last few years, have enjoyed spending time in Massachusetts, strangely. Well, first of all, we had good lobbyists there when I worked there, so you had somebody to hold your hand that legislators trusted. I was amazed at how large their staffs are, coming from mostly Illinois and Wisconsin, where you sit down with the committee chairman's staff of 8 in his office for an hour, but you can actually work through these issues. And from a public health perspective and the harm reduction perspective, the idea of people that are addicted to heroin or other drugs use and share needles, and diseases are spread by sharing of needles. So there is a recognition that, you know what, we can't stop everybody from doing everything we want, but if we can minimize the harm by providing some access for these people to a better delivery system and clean needles so they're not sharing and spreading hepatitis or AIDS, that's a worthwhile public health pursuit. Safety, seatbelts in an automobile, helmets on people that are interested in reducing harm and mitigating damage. There are plenty of avenues from a left and a right perspective where you have to know who your audience is and appeal to where they are.
And I think that there's a huge group of people that are unaware because they aren't the Facebook people. I mean, I service, a 70-plus-year-old man in an old folks home. He's probably not hanging out on Facebook and doesn't know this is live streaming, but we share emails. I think, being a community and being such a tight community is an asset. So just open up the dialogue, inform people, tell your mom. Mom has a friend who probably has an Enjoy. You have to start spreading the word. We that are connected via the internet need to spread it to those who are not, because that really is where we dwell. The PR hasn't been on our side. We just don't have the money the other side has, although I have noticed that positive stories are becoming more prolific. I think it's just a matter of time until it becomes mainstream, but we're not mainstream. But we need to make it mainstream by talking to others about it.
And it has been a strange dynamic that in the UK, in England, Great Britain, the thinking on all of this is so much more advanced in a lot of ways. I mean, we have crazy proposals before the European Union government and the global effort by the World Health Organization and others, but what we've seen in the scientific community in Great Britain is that they recognize things that we are years and years behind, and the most significant scientific document, I guess, that has come out is from Public Health England in the last 6 or 7 months, and they did a survey of all the existing research and essentially determined that these products, and it was, I believe, a conservative estimate that they're 95% less harmful than smoking a cigarette. I don't know if the connection can be made, but I've heard it made by others that some nations perhaps that have national health care and the taxpayers are footing the bill for everybody's coverage, they have a greater incentive perhaps to accept these ideas of how do we reduce smoking. But
Again, raise your hand if you have a question here in the hall, and I have another question from online. We'll get to you in a moment, sir. This is from Tim Jensen. A couple people are asking about this, actually. It's, why are the politicians ignoring the PHE study? One, what is the PHE study for people?
Public Health England.
Okay. And so what is, why are the politicians ignoring it? What's in that study?
Well, it determined that vapor products are at the least 95% safer. They went through and they looked over 100 studies. They compiled a 113-page report, and that is the Public Health of England stance on vapor products, and they're offering them on their National Health Service. I had the opportunity to sit in a meeting with, and the big three were there, the Cancer Society, the Heart Association, and the ALA. And I asked the question, I said, how do you guys rectify the difference in your opinion versus what's going on in England, with that Public Health England study. And they said, we're not familiar with that study. So again, the politicians that they're speaking with, they get a little sheet from Washington or wherever their main office is. They're not going home and studying for themselves, and they read it off to their legislators that they're lobbying, and that's what the legislators know unless we go and tell them otherwise.
Yeah, and the other dynamic that we have here that may impact that is they have an endless supply of money. The vapor community has struggled. There obviously are a lot of new businesses and people making some money and doing well, and that's great. But we aren't organized. We're not mature enough to have a 20-year trade association that's existed and grown and developed. But
we're wily.
yeah. But yeah, that's just another aspect of it that gets ignored.
So, sir?
Back to that PHE study, can you go into a little more detail in terms of what the year is? I mean, I missed probably the first part of this, so it's probably, I feel terrible about that at this point, but just can you give me a little more detail on like how long it was or why nobody else knows about it, I guess, is it just because of the strength of the lobbies in Washington that they're nobody, I mean, a ton about it, so I just like a little more information, that's all.
I bring it up whenever I can. I mean, it was, I believe it was a meta-analysis, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe.
And what they did is, I mean, all these scientists got together and looked at all the data out there, and they they weighted decisions and discussed it, and they came out with, things like, is it a gateway? And just our every common question. If you look at the National Health Service, there's a booklet that they're giving out, and it's kind of a handbook for vaping, and it's for their smoking cessation clinics, and it answers pretty much every question. The U.S. tends, when you're talking to legislators, they say, do you have any U.S. studies? The U.S. tends to be, highfalutin, I guess. They want to see U.S. studies, as though that one isn't valid. But it's certainly not being brought up to them by the lobbyists, the public health lobbyists that are in their office. It's ours. It's irrefutable. This is the biggest, best study that we've got, and it's irrefutable. And they just don't know about it.
Was it like a study of several individuals over the course of several years? Or was it a study of many individuals over several years, or was it like what are the risks truly in this? I know that it's 95% less than smoking, but is there some risk at all associated with this that's been proven, or is it? Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think anything's risk-free. Nothing.
Exactly.
Is
nothing is risk-free, and there is no long-term data that will tell you precisely what happens if you use this product for 25 years. So that, you take what you have, and then there certainly needs to be continued study of all of that, and all the products are different. It's really challenging. And the Public Health England was really their experts looking at all the data that was out there and all the studies and trying to come to a conclusion together. I think Victoria is correct in that there is a sort of parochialism in the United States where you bring up a foreign study and they're not interested, especially if it doesn't support their position. If it supported their position, they would run around town, like leading the parade. But it reveals that they have very little interest in science. I mean, you see the things that come out. If somebody, like, I would love to do a search and find it, but there have been things like MRSA. Everybody's concerned about that. I know my kids playing on their athletic turf or artificial turf fields and wrestlers and things, and it's a scary, legitimate thing. Your kids get papers sent home, but it's like you do some study on a rat that shows, some genomic impact that somehow is associated with MRSA, and then the headline is, e-cigarettes may cause MRSA or blindness. These are real things, and they get put out, and I get services to churn through all these stories, that story gets replicated 500 times. So it's people that rely on that really don't have an interest in science. They don't read the studies, even the American studies. They're promoting an agenda. And that's why, honestly, most legislators and policymakers, if you have the opportunity to build a relationship and trust and walk with them over time and give more information, they will come along. And maybe you just stop somebody from introducing a bill that they hold back and say, maybe I shouldn't jump out here, or maybe I don't want to sign my name onto this bill. Well, maybe 2 years later, they're willing to actually stand up and say, slow down. And I think part of that is also just appealing to those, from the other question, the outside groups. One that's always been of interest to me, the LGBT community, if you look at the smoking rates, and if you break down each segment of that category, I mean, the smoking rates are extraordinarily high. And in that community where the activists have fought the FDA before and fought on drug approvals and been suspicious of government and their slowness and inability to be responsive, to me that's like we haven't cracked that nut. And I think a lot of the proactive advocates that are working against us are part of a coalition on the left usually, but as I pointed out in Indiana, Republicans are doing plenty of bad things too. But they have a coalition, so you have labor. Labor has been involved in the California horrible situation there, but they want to tax these products, and they want to define them as tobacco products. But you have different segments, and if you can crack that nut sort of and pull some of these, you break up the coalition a little bit, that would be one way to do it. And it hasn't been done yet, but for bits and pieces.
I think that 95 was a conservative number. And remember, we're not 20 years out in vapor products. So maybe those 10 years can, maybe that 5 is a little cushion. But we know we're going to die if we smoke. I mean, and that's what this is, harm reduction. So you must always look at vapor products against the backdrop. I'm going to die if I smoke.
Another question here, ma'am?
Part A and B. A, where can I read the study and study the study? And B, how do I prove that we are light years behind and this research is light years ahead? If I'm going to present this, like let's say I'm going to go to my Mount Prospect board meeting and I'm going to say, here's...
I would encourage you to go to CASA, I believe it's www.casaa.org, and CASAA.org. That's Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association. They have science on their website that I would encourage you to read and draw your conclusions. SFATA does, I believe. I would encourage you, I mentioned Dr. Brad Radu, who is a senior fellow here at Heartland Institute. Google him and look for his blog, but he writes on tobacco issues and writes on science and vaping harm reduction issues. So when studies come out, the other one that I would strongly encourage is Google Dr. Michael Siegel, Boston University. He has an extraordinary blog. I have one pet project I want to do with some of these academics is their blogs are sometimes a little clunky. I like to get involved in social media, and when you want to share something and you get onto Twitter or Facebook and you don't have a picture or you have a 19-word headline in all caps, but that is one website. Anytime the CDC makes a crazy statement, like the study, the latest one that came out, they obviously were responding to prior studies have shown, or surveys have demonstrated that yes, there are teens that are experimenting with these products. However, teen smoking has declined at a much greater rate than it has previously. So it suggests that sure, minors are experimenting with these products, but they are not smoking at the same levels either. And not to say that any minor should use any of these products at all, but if you're going to look at the data, you should do so with some perspective. They also didn't include the fact that most of them did not use nicotine in the products. But the latest one that came out, they defined vaping and use of hookah as tobacco use. So, the finding was essentially, the declines in youth tobacco use have stopped. It's over. And, it's like, well, look at how many of them are smoking and less are smoking. Even hookah use is down. But they're playing with numbers, and that's where
commingling the two.
Dr. Siegel's in the School of Public Health at Boston University. He worked for the Centers for Disease Control. He testified against the tobacco companies in litigation. He's not a friend of tobacco. He's a tobacco control, believes smoking is a horrible, causes preventable deaths, but he's looking at this and saying the science is garbage, and he will point out specifically the rest of the story, he calls it, and what they've left out of their study. That they said, here's, formaldehyde existed in this experiment. And then he'll point out, well, you didn't compare the levels of formaldehyde in this versus smoking a cigarette, and you didn't point out that the temperatures at which you created this environment to produce this are nothing that is common in the way people use the products. No one ever could, but he will point that out. Or if they have conflicts of interest. I mean, there's certain ethical standards to reveal your conflicts of interest or who's funding a study. And everybody looks at big tobacco and says, oh gosh, is big tobacco funding this or that, and views it suspiciously. And everyone's free to do that. But you should be free to do it for everything. So if pharmaceutical companies that make nicotine replacement therapy products that fail 93% of the time and get used over and over and are subsidized by the government and aren't taxed, if they're funding your study, you have an obligation to disclose that, or if you've accepted funding from them, just to kind of level the playing field. But those are two academics that I would
And his
look
site
at.
is The Rest of the Story, Tobacco News Analysis and Commentary. And if you Google that, you'll find him. He's spectacular.
And that I'll add another one who's extraordinary is Clive Bates. It's the counterfactual. I don't know if it's the counterfactual.com, but if you Google Clive Bates, the counterfactual, Clive Bates was the director of action on smoking and health for the UK. So that was the, we want to stop people from smoking and explain how dangerous it is and see if we can reduce smoking-related disease and death. And that was his career, but he's a person that is honest and loves science, and he does critiques of any study that comes out, if it's misleading, if it's not. If somebody does something well, Public Health England, not only did he do an extensive discussion of that on his blog, but he also looked at, they created a guide for health officials in England to use to try to educate people about these products, when to use them, when to not. But he'll look at that and you'll find things. And I mean, that's the kind of thing where you go, gosh, I wish every county health department in the United States would do it this way. We don't ask for special favors. We don't want to be subsidized. We don't want a special government protected market. We just want to be able to compete and allow people to have choices. But those are three specific.
All right. Well, we have time for two more questions. I also want to mention that Brad Radu, as Brian noted, is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute. You can go to heartland.org and hit experts at the top and put RADU in there. You can also go to blog.heartland.org, RODU, my fault. Or you can also go to blog.heartland.org, and all of his stuff that he has on his other websites is also published there, so it's pretty easy to find him. So we'll have one more question here and one more question online, and we'll wrap it up for tonight.
Mike Hankin, Vaptio, I'm a manufacturer. Are there currently any studies being done regarding nicotine replacement, the patch, the gum, whatever, in comparison to people that are trying to leave combustible tobacco through vaping? Is there any studies like that going on now?
I don't know, and I imagine there are. There generally are. One of the problems with being regulated as an FDA product, or for them it's a smoking cessation product, is that if you want to change your product, you've got a lot of government looking at you and controlling what you can do. So I know when they wanted to, they realized people are using Nicorette gum over they used to say use it, I don't know what the exact, like it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks. You can use this and you won't die and you might stop smoking. And people in common practice were using, that found the products beneficial would use them for years. But before they could say anything like that, or, that it requires a lot of money and a lot of studies and getting the FDA on board to go along with it. So, and even coming up with a new flavor, things like that. That's why innovation is challenged. If you get a product approved under what many assume the deeming regs would be for FDA in a bottle of liquid, well, that's one. If you could get it approved, people argue about what it will cost. No one knows, honestly, what it will cost. It may cost you $10 million, it may cost you $30 million, and you don't know what your answer is going to be. So you may spend $30 million and get a no or never get a response. And that's just if you have a 15 milliliter bottle of 0.6 blueberry liquid. Well, if you have a 30 mil, that's two different products. You want to change things in that. Like cigarette companies have stopped. They don't want this to happen because they know how difficult it is to get a product approved, and they have a lot more resources. But you can't, if you want to, currently under the FDA, if you have a Marlboro cigarette and you want to change it in some nominal way, but maybe making the filter a little longer or anything like that, it's impossible to do. So that's, there are always studies, and there actually is a treasure trove of information that we need to do a better job of looking at with a lot of that research, because a lot of that deals with nicotine separate from smoking. And what you find with public health folks is they pull up a study on smoking and start making conclusions about nicotine, and it's like, we're not talking about smoking.
And that little handbook from Public Health England for their National Centers for Smoking Cessation and Training, I believe it's called, it does address using vaping products with other things. You tend to take whatever nicotine in that you require to feel comfortable. You don't smoke the entire pack of cigarettes, you don't vape too much, when you've had enough nicotine and you stop doing whatever it is that you're doing that's delivering it. But there is many studies, nothing comes to mind that's a single one, but there are many.
All right, and I want to thank everybody online. There's so many questions here. We couldn't get to them all as we wrap up for the evening, but I think this is a good one to end on from Bruce Nye. Thank you, Bruce.
We love Bruce.
Oh, it's a ringer. All right.
Bruce is a nurse, and he's a brilliant mind, and he reads every study and knows.
I hope it's not a trick
somebody,
question.
yeah.
No, it's not a trick question.
Yeah.
What
You should answer.
Bruce asks, what information is most important for legislators to know right now? And I think that's a good way to close it off. We have a message here. It's a complicated issue. It's a new issue. A lot of people are not educated on this. That's one of the problems with new technologies and new movements. So what's your answer for Bruce?
My answer is that we are here. There are probably 9 or 10 million of us in the United States.
We vape, we vote.
We vape, we vote. We're electronically connected. There are tens of thousands probably of Facebook groups. Every local city vape group, 3 or 4 of those, state vape groups, advocacy vape groups. We all share information. We're all watching. And we will get you if you cross us. And we do win. Last year there were over 500 pieces of legislation we were chasing down. And honestly, only a handful of them ended up passing. Some were really bad. But it is worse, as Vicki pointed out, at the county and city level, the municipal level, because we don't know. There's no some places they post the calendar on the bulletin board on Friday and it's coming up for a meeting on Monday. It's hard to follow it. But when you take it to the state level and you have 2 houses and you have committees and hearings and people show up, they back off when people show up. When they're getting phone calls and emails and people show up at a hearing and know a lot more about it than they do, they tend to slow down at least.
We are a community, and we just have to act like it.
Well put, well put. Let's give our speakers a round of applause, please. Before we leave, we're handing out these how did we do questionnaires to see what you thought of tonight's event. It gives us a lot of important feedback on how things went. And again, I encourage you to stay in the chat room and let us know what you thought of this and give us any suggestions to do it better in the future. If you want to learn more about the Heartland Institute, you can go to heartland.org, heartland.org. There are these Freedom Rising. This is our new prospectus. So if you're very new to the Heartland Institute, you're going to learn a lot about what we're about and why we do what we do. And if you enjoyed this event, this card is in the back. It has a lot of our upcoming events here in this space in the next few weeks. If you're a fan of Ayn Rand and read Atlas Shrugged, we're showing Atlas Shrugged parts 1, 2, and 3 here in this space in 3 consecutive Wednesdays, starting on May 18th, the 25th, and then June 1st. Right here in this space where we'll watch the film and talk about Ayn Rand and talk about her principles. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's first time kind of doing movie night. We'll even provide the popcorn, so that's going to be fun. And we do have policy studies and research that we've done on this issue and others that you can also grab on your way out. I want to thank all of you very much for taking the time out this evening to be with us. Thank you all of you online who were so energetic and great. I enjoyed watching you in the chat room. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.